So today I'd like to talk about the spontaneous order that allows large agglomerations, large collections of people, such as in cities, and Guatemala City is one of them. It has a population of over 2 million. New York City has a population of over 8 million. And so we're talking about large cities, and indeed the world, right, that somehow gets clothed, fed, entertained, medical services, housing, mostly without an overall design. And so that's the title that is reflected in the title of my talk, How Does Paris Get Fed? The phrase, how does Paris get fed, comes from a 19th century French economic journalist whom I'm pretty sure you've heard of, Frédéric Bastiat. And if you will indulge me, I'll read you something that he wrote over 150 years ago. He says, "On coming to Paris for a visit, I said to myself, here are a million human beings who would all die in a few days if supplies of all the suns did not flow into this great metropolis," he said. "It staggers the imagination to try to comprehend the vast multiplicity of objects that must pass through its gates tomorrow if its inhabitants are to be preserved from the horrors of famine, insurrection, and pillage. And yet, all are sleeping peacefully at this moment, without being disturbed for a single instant by the idea of so frightful a prospect. On the other hand, 80 departments have worked today without cooperative planning or mutual arrangement to keep Paris supplied. How does each succeeding day manage to bring to this gigantic market just what is necessary, neither too much nor too little?" So the general question, how does Paris get fed? Okay, now I've been teaching economics. As Darren mentioned, I'm an economics professor at one of the campuses of the State University of New York, and I've been teaching economics for 33 years. I've taught microeconomics, macroeconomics, industrial policy, environmental economics, econometrics, statistics, courses in cities, courses on the history of economic ideas. So I think I've had a lot of experience teaching undergraduates in the liberal arts college. And I think, with apologies to Frédéric Bastiat, I think I have my own way of expressing this problem, this central problem that collections of people face, that economies face, right? He said, how does Paris get fed? I have another way of putting it, and let me just give it to you slowly. In the presence of scarcity, I'll explain what each of these terms mean. Okay, I know not all of you have an economics background, but it's not too difficult. I'll explain it in the course of my talk. In the presence of scarcity, human diversity and natural diversity and imperfect knowledge, how does social cooperation among myriad self-interested strangers, how does that come about? How does that happen? How do you get cooperation? So this is it summarized. So in the presence of scarcity, human and natural diversity, and imperfect knowledge, how does social cooperation take place among myriad self-interested strangers? Okay, that's a little bit more wordy than saying, how does Paris get fed? But I think it gives important detail. So what I'd like to do today is to sort of expand on this. What I usually do when I teach, for example, my Principles of Economics course, my Introductory Economics course, is I'll spend about 6 weeks on this. So I'm going to do in like 40 minutes what I would do in 6 weeks. Not in quite so much detail, but I think I can do it. I've done this once before. So there are two kinds of ways of answering this question, what I call the central question of economics. In the presence of scarcity, human natural diversity, and imperfect knowledge, how does social cooperation take place among myriad strangers? Okay. self-interested strangers. Okay, so there are two ways of answering this central question of economics. One kind of answer or order is a designed order. If you look carefully at this, these are people. These are tens of thousands of people. Do you know what flag this is? The flag of North Korea, right? The flag of North Korea. And like a lot of similar kinds of countries, they like to put on spectacles where you organize individuals, take away their individuality, put them in uniforms, and tell them where to stand and how to move precisely. Right, so that way, obviously there's order here. There's a kind of order that is imposed. Unfortunately, or whatever, you have to strip away the individuality of each person. So these people, all these people, cannot pursue their own plans, right? They have to pursue the plan of the designer, the man or the woman or the committee that put this together. Right? So there's no individuality. If people were individuals and they followed their own plan, this order would disappear. Okay? So you need to have an imposed design in order to get an order when it's designed. The other way of getting an order is what we call emergent or spontaneous order. Emergent means it comes out of something without a plan, that the order that's formed is greater than the sum of the individual parts. So this is in New York. I recognize this. This is probably, 6th Avenue in New York. I could be wrong, but it probably is. So you see these individuals, these cars, and the congestion, all kinds of people, different shapes of vehicles. They are going the same direction. There's no, I don't see any destruction. There's no crashes. Somehow, there is an order here, okay, in the sense that you don't see those crashes, but also there's an order, there's kind of an unseen order. Like you take this guy or somebody, one of these people up here. They are pursuing their own plans. They are pursuing their individuality. They have somewhere to go. These are pedestrians, but they have somewhere to go. So that order, that orderliness, it looks chaotic, but the orderliness comes from the fact that the framework allows people the freedom to pursue their own plans without interfering with the plans of others. Now, clearly, right, this traffic and the cars could interfere with this guy and that guy trying to cross the street. But there are stop signals, or the devices to regulate traffic, but there's also just common sense. In New York City, I don't know what it's like in Guatemala City, but in New York City, basically you cross when you can. Right? It doesn't matter what the light says. Now that can be dangerous, but the number of fatalities and accidents is a lot lower than you would think it would be under those circumstances. Okay, so you get social cooperation here. They're not fighting with each other. They're able to pursue their plans, get to work, get to school, whatever it happens to be. So there's that form of social cooperation. So New York commuters get to where they're going. Paris gets fed. Okay, so economics as a science deals with these kinds of emergent spontaneous orders. Okay, because spontaneous orders, unlike a parade in North Korea, they're not machines. They're not things that are designed from the top down. In economics, there's a very famous debate that occurred about 100 years ago, really, 1920. Ludwig von Mises, who I know you've heard of because there's a library named after him, and his image appears. He launched this debate against the socialists, claiming that, well, if what you want to do is to produce an order among millions of people, if you want to feed Paris, It cannot be planned in the absence of private property. You have to have private property. You have to have exchange. You have to have prices. I'll explain all this in a moment. Okay, so the lesson of the socialist calculation debate is that you can have spontaneous order if you allow markets to operate. Okay, now let's go back to the CQE, the central question of economics. There are these three, we can call them obstacles, three things that get in your way to forming social cooperation. One was scarcity, one was human and natural diversity, and the third that I mentioned was imperfect knowledge. Let's take these in turn, but realize that in markets, when you have economic freedom means you could just associate with whomever you want to without harming them. Okay? You can have this kind of unplanned order emerging because you're using not just one designer imposing a vision, but many, many minds, many thinkers who are using their brains to pursue their goals. So if the environment is right, then people can do that, just like that city street scene. They're very, probably resourceful, intelligent people, and they're able to use their resourcefulness and their intelligence to get to where they're going, as long as the framework enables them to do that. We often talk about the rules of the game, right? The rules of football. Okay, you have rules of American football, which are very different from rules of football everyone else. Americans, we call football soccer. Okay, sometimes people excel in both sports. You can do American football, you can do global football, you can do baseball, you can do basketball. Some people are good athletes and they can do everything. But the rules are different. Success in Guatemalan football is different from success in American football. So the rules determine the space in which you can be successful, the space in which you can plan and operate. So the rules of the game are very, very important here. So you need to get the rules right. You need to get the rules right in order to get social cooperation where you have scarcity, human and natural diversity, and imperfect knowledge. Okay, so very briefly, what I often say to my students is that people have incentives. Incentives just means you prefer more to less. You want to improve your situation as you see it. Okay, not as somebody else tells you to, but as you see it. So you have an incentive. You have a goal to do better for yourself, whatever that means, right? That could mean going to university for, let's say, one more term, or it could mean, instead of going to university, going to work. Okay, you decide based on your incentives. Well, you want to do better, but the rules will tell you how to do that. So the rules of Guatemalan football versus the rules of American football will tell you how to channel your drive, your motivation, your incentives, so that you make the right choice. Okay? So in American football, you can pick up the ball and run with it, right? Guatemalan football, you don't do that, right? That's against the rules. So you make a choice on what to do, how to improve your situation based on the rules, what the rules will allow you to do. Right, so then you choose, and your choice interacts with other people's choices. In the North Korean parade example, individuals don't really, they can't have a choice. If they have a choice, they ruin the order. So there's no real interaction amongst the individuals in the uniform unless it was already designated, unless they're already told to do it. In a market order, people make choices, and those interactions complement. They go together sometimes. Well, let me put it this way. Buyers of products, if you want to go out and you want to buy a car, you're competing with other buyers, right? You want to pay a higher price than for that car than somebody who's competing. You want to pay a low price, okay? But if somebody else wants that car and you can afford a little bit more, maybe you'll offer a little bit higher price. So you compete against buyers. Sellers are competing against other sellers. They want to sell that car. They would love to sell that car for a very, very high price. But if they're competitors, they would be willing to lower the price as long as they're able to cover their costs. So you have buyers bidding up price, sellers bidding down the price until you get some kind of terms of trade where they can trade, right? Where they can exchange car for money. So you have that kind of competition, buyers against buyers, sellers against sellers, but buyers and sellers cooperate, right? We think of the seller of the car is, sometimes we tend to frame it in terms of an adversary, right? That's the enemy. Well, no, the seller wants to sell you something. The seller wants to give you something that will make you feel better off in exchange for money. In other words, you, in a market, you will not give up money unless what you're getting in return is more valuable to you. And if you have a seller who's willing to do that, that's great. From the seller's perspective, if the buyer is offering more money than the car is worth to the seller, well, that makes him or her better off. So the buyer, she is better off. The seller, he is better off. That's cooperation. Okay, and it's framed within competition between buyers and sellers between sellers. Okay, so the outcome of these interactions in a market tends to be that you increase people's well-being. Okay, now that's true that not all the time. Sometimes you make a wrong choice. Okay, you buy the wrong thing, or you sell the wrong thing. You buy at too high a price, or you sell at too low a price. Right, that happens. But in general, the gains that we get from trading are large enough to make us all better off. So historically, the gains per person has been rising and rising and rising like this, especially during the last 150 years. That's the general picture. Is talk about scarcity, human and natural diversity, and imperfect knowledge now. Well, now, what do we mean by scarcity? I think we all kind of know, I don't know what the Spanish word for scarcity is, but scarcity, the idea is that something is valuable to you, in your mind. That is, right now, if I have a thirst, this water has a high value to me. If I'm not thirsty, it has less value to me. Okay, you choose to be in one place versus another because you think that the value of being in one place is better than the value of being someplace else. So you choose. It's subjective. But then next, economics tells us that we value things according to what's called subjective marginal utility. I don't have to get into that too much, but the idea is that, well, it's true that I can't live without any water at all. If I don't drink water for 5 days, I die. Maybe 4 days, I'm dead. So you would think, well, water must be the most important thing in the world. But what economists have discovered is that it's not. We don't think of things in that way. We think in terms of, this is a liter of water or so, or a half liter. What is the value of one more bottle of water to me? Not all the water in the world, but this bottle of water to me as an individual right now, in my mind. So it's subjective marginal utility. Scarcity also means that if I want more of something that is scarce, of which there is scarcity, I have to give up something that's also of value. Time is scarce. You were all here today at 5:30. I'm very grateful to you. Why? Well, because you could be someplace else. Right? I notice there's like a fiesta going on out here, right? So maybe I won't be too long. But so time is scarce. In order to use your time to be here, you're having to sacrifice using that same time to be someplace else. So scarcity means in order to get more of one thing, you have to give up more. You have to give up something of value. Scarcity is a concept that politicians often forget. And I this is my one joke about politicians. Okay, so here it goes. We say that the first principle of economics is, as I just said, that scarcity exists. There's not enough of a resource to satisfy all human wants. Time is scarce, wealth is scarce, okay, resources are scarce. That's the first principle of economics. The first principle of politics is to ignore the first principle of economics. You think, oh, there's no scarcity, so I can give you as much health care as you want without thinking about it. We can have as big an army as possible and not think about what the cost is, and so on and so forth. So it's important that as ordinary people, as citizens, we have to recognize that scarcity exists. Okay, so you have scarce resource, that means you have to ration. It means you have to choose how to use it. You choose it. How do you choose it? How does a city like Paris or a nation like Guatemala or the United States, how are resources allocated, taken from one place and put to another? Who decides? Is it like North Korea, where everything is designed and planned, or is it done individually based on choices of individuals? Okay, so scarcity is kind of it's a fact of the world, which, as I said, politicians often ignore, people often ignore. But scarcity exists, and that means that in order to get more of one thing, you have to give up more of another. However, an economist sometimes, maybe you have economics professors who say something like, there's no such thing as a free lunch. There's no such thing. In other words, to get something, you have to give something up. It's not free. Later on, I'm going to talk to you about how there are, in fact, free lunches. How Paris gets fed, in some sense, by people who discover that there are actually free lunches. Okay, so this is just a diagram. I don't mean to scare you. Some of you who study economics have seen something like this. Let me explain briefly what this is. This is a diagram to illustrate what scarcity means. So we have amount of wheat here. So you go from 0 all the way up to 200, let's say, kilos of wheat. And over here you have cotton. So 0 kilos of cotton all the way up to 400. What this blue line tells you is for a given amount of land and technology and labor and capital, if we keep that constant, if we freeze it, how much cotton and how much wheat can we produce? What's the most amount of cotton we could produce? What's the most amount of wheat we could produce? So, for example, anywhere on this line gives you the best or the most combination, the most of each of these things that you can produce given the land and resources that you have available. So point A means you have 300, you can produce 300 kilos of cotton, or, excuse me, you can produce 300 kilos of cotton plus 200 kilos of wheat. So you can produce that combination. If you want to produce more cotton, let's say you go from 300 kilos to 400, you want to increase it by 100 kilos, well, you can't keep the amount of wheat that you're producing the same because land is scarce. The land that you used for, some of the land you used for wheat now has to be used for cotton. So you have to sacrifice some wheat in order to get more cotton. That's all it is. So that's scarcity. What do I mean by human and natural diversity? That's actually very straightforward. People are different. They have different knowledge, they have different skills, they have different tastes. People have control over different resources. Sometimes it's your unique skills as a laborer. You may control property that is desirable, that's fertile land, or you may control property that is in a good location for trade or for entertainment or for vacationing, whatever it may be. So this difference, these diversities of human beings and of resources can be an obstacle, right? Because for tens of thousands of years before we're talking about 10,000 years ago and before 10,000 years ago. If people have different tastes, they have different beliefs, if they have different resources, some have resources to precious metals or useful metals, or actually 10,000 years ago it wasn't metal, useful gems or useful animals, they will fight over them, right? They'll have war. In order to get more of one thing, someone else has to get less. Okay, so you have that problem. What markets do, and I'll show you in just a moment, is turn those differences, those obstacles, into opportunities. Okay, in economics, we call it the principle of comparative advantage. It comes from the great economist named David Ricardo. And David Ricardo, sometimes this idea is called the Ricardian law of association. And basically, I can't go through the whole theory for you, but basically the idea is that even the person with the worst resources, not so smart, poor, without resources, has an advantage somewhere against everybody else in the world. That person, him or her, can do something more cheaply than anyone else, at lower cost than anyone else. Okay? That may sound weird, or that may seem like a crazy claim, but it's a very simple proposition to prove. Okay, I won't try to do it now. I'll do it later if you'd like me to. All right, so diversity, when you can trade, when you can specialize in where your costs are the lowest, then it turns that difference, that diversity, into a feature, something that is good. Each of us is different. We pursue that thing where we are the most efficient. Whether that means becoming a college professor, whether that means becoming a truck driver, a gardener, a movie star, whatever that happens to be, right? This doesn't say that everybody's going to be equal, but it does say that there is a place for everybody to operate where they have an advantage. Okay. So, why should we associate with one another if we're all the same? Right? Why should we? If everybody has the same talent, the same resources, there's no reason. Well, there may be reasons, but there are fewer reasons to come together and associate with each other if we're all the same. It's the differences with the right rules of the game. It's the differences that enable us to associate and to trade profitably, okay, with advantage. And then one thing I want to add here is it's not all just about money. It's not all just about profits and losses and all that kind of thing. Markets require rules like property, rules like free association, rules like contracting. You need property rights, you need free association, you need contracting. Those are very important. But for markets to flourish, you need to have sort of non-market rules. That is, you have to have rules that allow people to associate with each other in social networks. Like it could be internet, it could be this, right, as a social interaction and network. You can have networks that are inclusive, that bring people in, that, oh yeah, come join my network, right? You can have clubs that are pretty liberal in who they allow in. You can have cities that allow strangers in very easily. Or you can have societies that say, no, you have to, before you can join us, you have to, believe everything that we believe. If not, then get out. Or they just say, no strangers, you cannot come in. So you can have exclusive social networks or inclusive social networks. And that depends on whether or not the rules encourage strangers or discourage strangers. Right? Because there are two ways of dealing with strangers. One is this way, and the other is this way. So you can fight and have conflict, or you can trade peacefully. It all depends on the rules of the game. The rules say it's okay to use violence against people and steal from them, that's what's going to happen. You're going to have that first way. If the rules say you cannot do that, the only way you can come to an advantage is to peacefully persuade somebody else to associate with you, to trade with you, to buy what you have or to sell what you have, to sell to them or to buy from them. Okay, so both parties, as this picture implies, both parties must expect to gain from the trade. Okay, so we got scarcity, we got human and natural diversity. What about imperfect knowledge, right? We don't know everything that is that would be helpful. We don't know everything that would be helpful to us to execute a plan, right? You are all here pursuing a university education. Why are you here? Because you think, at the university, because you think that this is probably the best thing that you could do, but you don't know for sure, right? You don't know. The world is uncertain. So you have imperfect knowledge. We make mistakes. If you're a seller, you're trying to sell a product, maybe nobody buys it. If you want to buy something for, let's say, a really, really cheap cell phone for a very low price, maybe you're wrong. Such a thing doesn't exist yet. Okay, so how do you deal with imperfect knowledge? We've seen sort of how scarcity you deal with, how human and natural diversity you deal with. What about imperfect knowledge? Well, in economics, we emphasize one of the main things, not the only thing, but one of the main things is market prices. Market, demand, supply, kind of thing. And what this tells you is that scarcity and market prices, when people are free to trade and prices are free to adjust, when that happens, when scarcity rises, prices will rise. When scarcity falls, prices will fall. In other words, market prices, reflect scarcities, okay, when we let them. So, for example, if demand increases more than supply, or supply falls more than demand, then prices will rise. On the other hand, if demand falls relative to supply, or if supply rises relative to demand, then prices will fall, reflecting scarcity. Well, scarcity is this relationship between demand and supply. So that actually kind of affects, that addresses the scarcity issue. Right? If you have market prices, subjective evaluation and all of that, market prices will help people guide their behavior. Because you know that, how do we know that an ounce of gold is less scarce than an ounce of platinum? How do we know that? Well, because the price of platinum is like 10 times higher. We don't have to, guess. We just look at the prices. It'll tell us, well, platinum must be scarcer than gold. That's because its prices are higher. All right, so the other thing that prices enable people to do is to calculate profits and loss. So if you're in business and you want to think, should I produce, try to produce this new product? Maybe it's a different kind of, washing machine or something. You think, okay, what's it going to cost me to produce the washing machine? Well, I have the price of labor, price of materials, price of capital. And I add all those things up and I get the cost. And I think, okay, I want to sell this washing machine. How much do I think people will pay for that washing machine? What's the price? Right? So if the price that I can get for the product is greater than the cost of producing it, then I make a profit and I'll go ahead and do it. If the cost is greater than the revenue, the price, then I won't do it. So profits tell us that we're going in the right direction. Losses tell us that we're going in the wrong direction. So getting back here. So for profits, ex ante, you haven't made the washing machine yet, but you can sort of calculate whether or not it's a good idea. Let's say we calculate it, and based on the prices that we see and the way we're going to produce and sell, we think, yeah, it's going to produce a profit. I think we're going to make a profit by selling this washing machine. That's ex ante. ex ante. So in other words, you wouldn't do something, you wouldn't make this investment if you thought you were going to make a loss. Right? No point. You'd only do it if you thought you were going to make a profit. So you make the investment hoping that it's going to work out. So ex post, right, after you've sold it, you see, did I make a profit or did I make a loss? If you made a profit, that says what? That says, oh, I made the right decision. If you make a loss, that means you did the wrong thing. Profits mean you did the right thing. Losses mean you did the wrong thing. So that's a very powerful tool. This is why Mises said in the socialist calculation debate, he said, without money prices that comes about from people trading their property, you're not going to be able to plan rationally. You're not going to know, in other words, you're not going to know when you are making a mistake. Prices that emerge from trade in markets and the rules of the game help us to determine when we're making a mistake and when we're doing the right thing. The other thing I want to say, so really market prices solve a lot of the problem or answer a lot of the central question of economics, right? Because prices reflect scarcity. Comparative advantage means that we can specialize and sell our services where we're most efficient and so forth. And then we have imperfect knowledge. Prices help guide us to make our decisions, even though we don't have all the knowledge necessary. We just have to look at prices. There's one other element, and that's entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship means we discover new opportunities. We discover opportunities that we did not know exist. Entrepreneurship directly removes imperfect knowledge. Or at least it reduces our ignorance. Okay, nobody has perfect knowledge, but it reduces our ignorance. So everybody has entrepreneurship. Each of us has the capacity to discover a profit opportunity. Right, the weekend is coming up. And maybe some of you want to go someplace, the beach or the mountains or something. You'd like to go, but you have limited resources and you don't know who else is going. So you can share the expenses. So whatever it is, I'm sure people in this room have their own plans to do this weekend. And I'll bet you there's somebody else in this room that you don't know about who can help you achieve that plan in a better way. Right? So that's the kind of ignorance we're kind of talking about. That is, there's knowledge out there that you could acquire which would make you better off, but you don't know about it yet. Entrepreneurship, our capacity to discover those gaps in knowledge, is what helps us to overcome that ignorance. Another way of thinking about it is, I had wheat and whatever. Now I have robots and corn. Just another image I found on the internet. But what happens is we have this production possibility frontier, and it shifts it out. Entrepreneurship pushes this out, so we can get more of both things. There are free lunches, as I said before. There are free lunches if the rules enable people to innovate. The rules let people discover. Encourage people to experiment and to try and fail. If failure is tolerated, then you're going to get innovation. There are no robots 150 years ago when Bastiat wrote. Okay. Today we have robots, we have artificial intelligence. These are innovations that comes about through entrepreneurship. So it creates new production possibility frontiers. And it pushes out existing production possibility frontiers. So the market process, this process of learning, coordinates ordinary people's choices, but only when the rules of the game are right. So we're talking about well-established property rights. It's clear what I own, it's clear what you own. There's free association, where we have inclusive networks, not exclusive ones. And the rule of law. Rule of law just means that rules don't change all of a sudden according to one person's advantage. Right? Rules don't identify particular individuals or group. Rules don't identify, or they're not aimed at particular individuals or particular groups, either for disadvantage or for advantage. Rules don't privilege some people. rules do not disadvantage other people. It's just everybody plays by the same rules. It's like the speed limit. Okay? It applies equally to everybody. That's the rule of law. So we have the rules of the game, but then we also have what I said before, the non-market foundations. So we have, norms. These are rules that say don't cheat, okay? Be trustworthy, trust other people, be honest and fair. Those, strictly speaking, is not, it's not economics, right? Strictly speaking, but it's necessary. These things are necessary for this market process to flourish. It's necessary for people to discover scarcities, remove them, to cooperate with other strangers who are different from you, and to remove your ignorance. I'm sure, drawing to the end here, I'm sure all of you have seen the iPencil. Okay. That's really the lesson of iPencil. All these different elements owned and controlled by thousands, maybe millions of people, either their talents, their resources, their know-how, and they're complete strangers to each other, and they somehow coordinate to produce this pencil, right? What's the moral of iPencil? The moral is no one can build a pencil. Okay, no one can build one of these. No one can build a light bulb, because it takes so many people to cooperate, although they're not cooperating consciously. It's not somebody's design imposed. It's cooperation and order, a spontaneous, unplanned order that emerges. So you can't make a pencil. You can't even make a loaf of bread. I mean, yeah, you can make a loaf of bread, but it requires flour, an oven, okay, a mixing bowl, spoon. Who created those, right? You had to buy those things. So you have a spoon. Who made the spoon? Well, all these things. Each of these elements, the mixing bowl, the oven, is a very tip of the iceberg. Okay. Millions of people. Okay, so the central question of economics. We need property rights, free association, and the rule of law to answer it. You need to trade peacefully and to form non-market foundations. Okay, you have to have trust, honesty, reciprocity. To generate market prices, to signal scarcity, to calculate profits and losses, to entrepreneurially discover profit opportunities, to push out that frontier so that we're richer over time through entrepreneurship, and we can create brand new production possibility frontiers, new products that make people better off. Okay, so markets and trade, we can address each of these things. We can cope with scarcity, human and natural diversity, and imperfect knowledge. So what look like obstacles are really indispensable elements of a dynamic process that constitutes the market. So the free market particularly, turns obstacles into opportunities. And that's how Paris gets fit.